It's Ashley Pereira, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
me.
All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. I am Justin. I'm the founder of the Holler. Just so you guys all know, we are at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We also have hollers across the state, and that's all thanks to your support. We really do appreciate all the small dollar donations. They go a long way. We also want to thank Lisa Parker. If you're buying or selling a home in Middle Tennessee, she's really supportive of us. So make sure you use her if you're looking for a realtor. That's one way to support the Holler. We usually talk about a lot of the stuff that we're hollering about. And one of the stories that we posted about this week that I think caught a lot of people's eyes, just as about how twisted it really is, and how we're seeing a guy who obviously did something wrong get off, was this story involving Ashley Pereira, who's here today. And just to set it up, the story was titled "Alabama Pastor Who Raped Teen Gets Probation. Here's Why." And just as a little bit of backstory, this is a story that happened in Alabama, but where both of the players in the story now live in Tennessee. Ashley, when she was 14, was raped, is the technical term. It's what happened, by a pastor at the time who was 20. She was 14, and her parents then pressured her to marry him. They had a child together. She eventually divorced him. They now share custody of that child, and he faced charges, but apparently is now going to get off without jail time. So why don't we start from the beginning? Ashley, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. And you're in Nashville, I should let people know. And we can see your comments. Please comment along. So his name is Jason Greathouse.
Yeah.
When did you first meet him?
I met Jason when I was 14, and actually some of the stories actually got his age wrong. He was actually 24. So
Okay.
There was a 10-year difference.
That's a big difference at that age, especially.
Yeah, I met him through a Christian bookstore. My parents took me out of school when I was really young, at 13, because I had an eating disorder. I was struggling heavily with that. So they said they thought it was best to homeschool at that time. And my mom went into the Christian bookstore in order to get a lot of resources for homeschoolers, which is quite a normal thing. And he had expressed that he was a youth pastor, and that he would invite me and my brother to come attend his church. And so I was about 14 at that time.
And this was in Alabama, which is where you grew up?
Yeah. My dad was in the Army, so we traveled around a lot, and he was gone a lot. But yeah, it happened kind of like a suburb military type town.
And how does he go from just being a youth pastor to living with you guys?
So what happened was, Jason was a single guy, and he would pastor on Wednesdays, and he was going through a financially struggling time. He wanted to go back to college. So my parents, or not really my parents, but my mom, opened up a room and said, "Hey, we'll rent a room to you for free so that you can go and kind of finish what you need to for school."
Okay, so he takes her up on that. He moves in. And what was your dynamic with him at that point?
Well, with a lot of young girls who struggle with eating disorders, I had a lot of self-confidence issues. I didn't think I was beautiful. And he really helped me through my eating disorder and also gave me a lot of self-confidence, made me feel good about myself. So I leaned heavily into him as a mentor at that time. And the way that he preached was at the youth ministry was just so progressive in a sense, but just so, what's the word? Like it was just not as, cardboard as a lot of other, youth ministries around town. So it was a lot of wanting that validation and wanting that self-confidence and doing things and talking to him and trying to get closer to that person that was giving me the validation that I wanted at that time, to tell me, that I'm great and that I'm worthy and that I am beautiful and this and so on and so on. And he lived in the house. So and I was homeschooling myself through high school, or junior high at the time. I was in 8th grade. Um, and he was just around all the time.
So, I have to say it seems sort of extra, not extra. There's no way to be extra or lesser, but, fairly predatory to like take advantage of a situation that's based on scripture and spirituality. That seems like an added element to this where, he is sort of using this perch as a pastor, as theoretically a man of God, to ingratiate himself with you, with your family. Do you think this was his plan, or was this something that sort of happened? And how does that play into it for you?
I'm not so sure because, over time, I had, one thing led to another. And one night at my family's home, I lost my virginity to Jason. And I remember being so not understanding. Sometimes a lot of people in their first time, they don't even know like what technically counts as intercourse and understanding what that is, especially as a child. And so when I told my mom, her response was, absurd now looking back. It's just, how was it?
Wow.
And that as a teenager, we're taught in the church and just in general to save ourselves until marriage. And that was a concept that was constantly pushed on my brother and I. And also that if we did give our bodies to somebody, I mean, in the eyes of God, that's the person that we're supposed to be with. So it was mainly a thing where, it was my responsibility. If I was going to do actions of an adult that now I'm an adult, that I owe it to God and this person to make things work because it was my fault that I gave my body to this man. So it was just it's so tough looking back. My mother and I don't have a relationship anymore, or we hadn't. There was a lot of trying to reconcile over the years, because with anybody, you want and you crave that relationship with your parents or your mother, or even though so many bad things have happened, and so much emotional trauma, but eventually that just had to, you just have to let things go sometimes, even if people are family, if they continue to hurt you, sometimes it's best to break. But that's later in the years. At that time, it was totally new. And made it my responsibility to make things work.
So, first of all, I just want you to know people are saying things like Jacaranda saying, "Thank you for sharing your story. You're helping so many youngsters right now." And I absolutely agree. I want to ask you just on that point about your parents' reaction, especially your mother's. How was it? I mean, wow, that's just a shocking thing to hear from a mother when a 14-year-old is telling her that a 24-year-old raped her, had sex with her. Do you think that is rooted in sort of the patriarchal uh views that, you know, it's the woman's fault, it's the girl's fault, and it can't be the man's fault? Is there something to that?
I mean, I've had conversations within the last year with my mother, her saying that she would be defending Jason at a potential trial. She flew into Nashville and stayed with him, I think, this past weekend, just in case he were to have one, so that she could be there to speak on his behalf. She has is quoted to me time and time again, I was a promiscuous child, I had never had sexual intercourse or anything like that. I was a good kid, right? Never got in trouble. Sunday, went to, church Sunday, Sunday night, Wednesday, got A's and B's in school, was getting ready to go to college and was just struggling, with my mental health and that eating disorder. And, I wasn't the type of kid that I feel like on the standard, like, did much of anything wrong at that time.
Right.
Even if I was the most horrible kid, that it made a difference.
No, absolutely. So, at what point first of all, how long did this go on, and at what point do you realize you're pregnant, and what is that moment like?
So Jason lived with us for about a year and a half. He rented a home, I feel like, just to, hide things from the church that he was living with us. He never even lived in the house that he was paying for. But he lived with us for a year and a half. And there was a time where I felt Jason was intentionally trying to impregnate me. And I, retaliated against that. And I told a girlfriend of mine, she was 15, and she was like, you don't have to do this. Like, it's not your responsibility to make things work. It's okay with other people in the future. You don't have to be with this person the rest of your life. I feel that you need to just make sure that things aren't happening with you and him. And I agreed, and I tried, but at that point there was just so much guilt that was put on me, that we had already been so far into the abuse that it was my responsibility still to make things work. And then eventually I got pregnant, and that, the pregnancy and the thoughts of that, honestly, my focus was just being a mother at that time. And I think I was still struggling with the eating disorder, and I felt that I needed to focus on being healthy at that time, and just protecting myself.
No part of you thought about terminating the pregnancy?
No, I mean, we were a very religious family, and I wouldn't have ever had an option, honestly. I mean, I was 16, I didn't have a job. Even if I wanted to, I mean, I didn't have money to do it, and my parents were definitely. We had some doctors call us and say, is that an option for you? And my mom was like, no, that's not an option for her. So that was never an option for me.
So you were homeschooling, so it's not as though you were going to school while you were pregnant and throughout the duration of the pregnancy. Was Jason there throughout that? I mean, was this like, okay, we're going to make this work? Was it that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's what my parents had, like my mom had pushed, like now that I was pregnant, like I had to make things work, or we had to make things work in order to normalize the situation so that the community or close friends or family wouldn't press charges. So the whole dynamic was surrounded by protecting Jason, not protecting me, but not
Wow.
my future or him. It was all around protecting him. And married and being pushed to that was 4 days after I turned 16. And it was all an attempt to protect him.
And did you already have the child?
No, I was
Okay, so you were pregnant at the time. And
Mhm.
so then they start pushing you to marry him. And is any part of anybody saying, "Hey, by the way, like this has been illegal"?
No. Well,
Okay.
yes, we knew it was illegal, but my mom and Jason and other people were like, Olivia, my child, would have to spend the rest of her life knowing that her father was a sex offender and that he would be in prison and I would be a single mom and I would have to do everything on my own. And I could never possibly be with another person because, you know, I've given my body and now I'm having a child with this person. And in God's eyes, I can't with another person. And so there's all this pressure of making things work and becoming an adult. Because if I'm going to do adult things, then I need to take responsibility for what I've done and raise this child and get a job and finish high school on my own. My mom didn't homeschool me, I homeschooled myself online. And it was all the responsibility was being put on me
Yeah.
at that time. So once I got pregnant, I was viewed as an adult. I wasn't viewed as a child or anything. Jason was viewed as an adult. I was viewed as an adult. So they just normalized everything. But I was a child. Once I got a job, I was working over 40 hours a week. I was breastfeeding. I was trying to finish high school. And
Where were you working?
I was working at Ruby Tuesdays as a hostess.
Okay.
Um,
And Olivia was living with you?
yeah, we all lived with my parents. So
And Jason was still living there?
Mhm.
Okay. And at what point did the divorce come?
So when I started working at Ruby Tuesdays, a lot of other people, I told them my story and were like, oh yeah, this is it and everything's okay and this is normal. And they were like, no, it's not normal. No, like what are you talking about? And there was quite a few people that helped me realize what had happened. And I think when I was getting close to 17, I just snapped. I snapped and I was like, oh my God, like what has happened to me? It was going from like, how could someone that age be attracted to somebody who's 14, who's 15? Like, how could that happen? How can it be a person? It just all clicked at one time. And I remember calling my mom. I had just gotten off of work. I had an $800 paycheck in my hand. And I said, I'm not coming back. I'm taking my kid and I'm going to college and I'm getting a divorce. This should have never happened. You should have never let this happen. And I'm going to take control of my life.
Do you remember what made it snap for you? Was there something that happened?
I think, no, I think my age, like even like a year or two, an age difference from 14 to 16 and a half to 17. And then other people being like, that's such a messed up situation.
Mm-hmm.
And me being like, oh my God, yeah, it is. And I think it was partly victim's guilt and denial at that time too. Trying to be in denial of it, trying to be in denial, like this isn't happening to me, everything's going to be okay. God's going to take care of me, everything's going to be fine, my parents think it's okay, so obviously it must be okay, like everything's going to be okay. And it just took me and myself and like the people surrounding me being like, it's not okay.
And as this is happening, is he still pastoring? Is he still preaching the word of God to people?
No, he stopped as soon as I started showing.
Okay. And because people knew, and it was, I'm sure, was it a small town?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So people knew it was a small town. People were probably talking about that, and nobody wants to hear what he has to say about what Jesus has to say at that point. So you go to school with Olivia. How did the divorce go?
I spent half of that $800 check on a divorce.
On a lawyer?
Yeah. And we had been through the options of pressing charges, but I'm not sure what happened at that moment. Like if they just didn't look into it good enough, but they said that I couldn't press charges because we got married. and that if I wanted a divorce, that's fine. But I was 16. If any of you have paid for a divorce, you know how expensive that can be. He was like, if you contest at all, you're going to spend thousands of dollars. And he was like, do you have that? And I'm like, no, I'm 16. Like, who's going to have that? So we had to settle with joint custody and no child support.
So you had a terrible divorce because you got really nothing out of it. He doesn't even, so child support isn't even a part of that settlement. So
No,
he doesn't pay child support at all.
he's never paid a dime of child support.
Oh my goodness. And what, your parents are basically on his side through all this?
Yeah. I also had to emancipate myself at 16 because by being separated, I was a dependent and I was going to be put in the foster care system. So luckily, this attorney, his name was Tad Morgan, was so kind and represented me pro bono in emancipation from my parents, just so I could sign on an apartment. And yeah, it didn't help much because I, couldn't. Well, I guess it prevented me from going to the foster care system, but I mean, I couldn't even afford a regular apartment at that time because I was making $10 an hour.
And the wild part of this, I mean, obviously there's a million wild parts, but one aspect of this is you have joint custody. So you're tethered to him as you're trying to pull away from him through the existence of this person, which I'm assuming is probably the most important thing in your world. So while she's important to you, she's also a connection to him. How does that manifest through all this?
Um, but can you rephrase?
I'm just saying, like, you can't really get away from him because you share a child with him. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I could never because of the court, because I was never recognized as a victim. I don't even think they put two and two together with our ages and what was going on or anything. Just joint custody. So
Did you bring that up in the proceedings that this is how this happened?
no, we couldn't afford to go to court.
Wow.
Like I couldn't afford it. It's like one of those things where you pay like $500 just to get a divorce and get papers drawn up and you sign it. It's presented to the judge and then there's no actual like court hearing.
Right. So it was just a technicality, basically.
Yeah. He was like, honey, like, unless you have thousands of dollars or if your parents have like this much, I
mean, it just shows how, the system is skewed against people who don't have money.
Oh yeah. I mean, especially when you're a child, like, if you, it's so sad because if you don't know how to present yourself in court, with any child custody battle or hearing, it's very tough. You don't just get free lawyers.
Right.
Like you get
That's not how that works.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes you can't present evidence unless you know how to, and there's big avenues for that. And I was highly advised not to represent myself in court because I could end up losing everything based on being a homeless 16-year-old.
Oh, and this is, I mean, a comment from Cajun says literally everyone who's supposed to love and support you and every system that should protect you failed you. Reprehensible, completely true. And Jill says becoming a parent yourself helped you think of yourself as a child at 14, which is probably also accurate. Patty's asking how old your daughter is now.
The same age I was when I became yeah, and that's part of the reason. I mean, there's so many reasons why this is just happening now, but seeing my daughter at 14, it sits worse with me the older she got. It sat worse with me and worse because I look at her and like, if a 24-year-old man, and she came to me and said, I lost my virginity to a 24-year-old man, I'm sure I would be in prison by that time. Honestly, I mean, there's just no way. There's just no way in my right mind that I could just not be like, what do we do to protect you from this person for the rest of your life? I don't care if you would have a baby with this person. Like, I'll take care of your baby with you. Like, I'll support you. I'm your parent, and I'll make sure he doesn't come within one state of you ever again. Like, that's how I feel as she's gotten older, and it just breaks my heart even more. And it's hard because when you have, I mean, if anybody here had a teenage daughter, you know, imagining looking her in the eye and being like, you're going to have to co-parent with your rapist for the next 18 years. I mean, and that happens to so many people. That happens to so many girls. I reached out to an organization. It's called Unchained at Last. It's for child rape or child brides. And most of them are married to men who are over 18 or way over 18. And they have to deal with the same thing. And most of them don't even get their situations to the court system because there's so many laws in the United States. Say you have a 2-year statutory statutes of limitations, right? So before you can even process what happened to you, you have to report it, you know, especially if your parents or your family is part of the problem. Sometimes that can take years, you know, to even try to come forward and say something about. There are limitations on if you get married, you can never press charges. And that's why I was told that at a very young age, because that is a law in so many of our states that if you do get married, you can't, you know.
So the incentive is set up to have victims of child rape then essentially child marry so that the rapist does not get punished. That's the way the system is set up. And is that why he's not facing jail time, is because you guys got married back then?
I think that's part of the reason is everybody was like, oh, they were happily married. And it was like, well, also you got to understand like Stockholm syndrome and things.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even matter if I was, you know, totally for it and in love or whatever at one point and then decided, oh my God, what
No.
happened to me was wrong. It doesn't matter. I was a child. Like, man, my child wanted to shave half of her eyebrow the other day because she thought it was cool. Like,
Right.
I don't let our children make bad decisions for themselves.
Right. So many people seeing this story have said there's no such thing as consensual sex when you're 14 years old.
Oh,
And that's, I would wonder what you feel about that statement.
I would totally agree. I mean, I didn't even know, like, I had to look online to see if I actually had sex or not because I had no idea. Like, I knew what it was and I knew what happened, but I was like, wait, because, you know, TMI, but most of the time, the first time isn't like, you know, pretty able, if that, I don't know.
Sure. Yes.
Like, you know, I'm like, what happened?
Right. Was that even sex? Yeah, I think we've all been there. I personally can say I have as well. Uh, yes. So, how did you guys get to Tennessee? I'm trying to get to now the part of the story where you both somehow live in Tennessee and then have now, I guess, decided to press charges recently, or how did the legal proceedings get restarted?
That's a good question. So when I was 19 years old, 18, 19, I moved to Tennessee with Olivia by myself and lived in Tennessee.
Were you allowed to do that?
Yeah, I was allowed to do that.
Okay.
So when that happened, she had gone a year without seeing her dad. A total year, you know.
By his choice, your choice, nobody's choice?
I mean, he just never came.
He didn't care.
I think it was more about money than it was about
Okay.
his own kid, honestly. But I can't say why. But
Okay.
after a year, I was going through some financial hardships, and she had not seen her dad for the summer. He was supposed to send her down. She was going to be visiting her grandma and her grandpa and her other grandmas and her other grandpas. So whole family. And I was like, wow, I need to figure out some stuff. She's going to visit you for the summer. I'm going to come down there. I'm going to finish school. We're going back to Tennessee after. And that's how we all ended up, because he knew that I lived there. So then I think he decided that he wanted to be close to his daughter. He ended up getting a job. So I'm not sure why he decided to move to Tennessee, but I think it was part of that, is that he wanted that, and he wanted to take control of our custody at that time. So it was very complicated.
So he then tried to get custody of her?
Yeah, in Alabama. So while she was visiting for the summer, I don't know what he said about me, but it should have never taken place in Alabama. I was a Tennessee resident as primary parent in Tennessee. So it should have been in Tennessee, but it happened in Alabama because, I don't know, he said I was like, I didn't have a place to live, or I was absent or something like that while I was there. So I never got a notice or anything. And so they treated him like a normal dad. And was like, well, she's not here. Here you go. I do remember signing something for school, like for her to go to a preschool during the summer. But I don't know if what I signed was what I think I signed.
So Alabama tries to award him sole custody in Alabama of your child while she's supposed to be down there for the summer. And then he calls you and says, I have custody of our daughter now.
I didn't even know.
So how did you find that out? That's crazy.
The parenting plan was never transferred over to Tennessee. And I was also like 20 years old. I was 20, 21. And he said, well, he was like, I'm going to need your help signing this so that she could go to preschool in your mom's district. And I was like, I think that's good. She was diagnosed with autism when she was 2. So education and ABA therapy, occupational therapy, was very, very important to keep her. So I was like, whatever we have to do to make sure that she stays in school, we will. But I didn't understand law, and I didn't understand that with schooling, because she had never been in kindergarten or anything like that yet, what the process was for that. So when I thought I was signing something for her to go to school there, I think what I signed was something totally different. So then in 2020, never transfers the parenting plan. In 2020, out of the blue, we're on autopilot parenting. I'm dealing with his wife for years. I don't even deal with Jason for years. Like I'm co-parenting with his wife because I don't want to deal with him as much as possible. I'd rather deal with a person who hasn't hurt me than a person who has, autopilot co-parenting. And remember, like, I'm under the impression I can never press charges. So years and years of acceptance and years of, I have to do this. I have no choice. Comes to Tennessee after 10 years or 8 to 10 years, he's never transferred over our parenting plan. And out of the blue, after our daughter in 2020, unfortunately, attempted suicide. And it was just totally out of the blue. Then having to deal with this person, deal with Jason again. And then he submits this custody order, trying to take her completely away from me, which he was successful for about a couple weeks until the judge said, no, you guys are still going to have joint custody. But I tried to be like, why is this person in court? Why is this person able to? I can show you that he is an unregistered sex offender. I can show you that I'm a victim. You can put his age and my age together and the age of our child.
How could you show them that? By the age of your child?
Yeah, with her birth certificate. It said age, my age, her age. And I was like, I was 15. He was 25. I had my daughter when I was 16. I was like, why? I want to fight this. I was like, this shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening anymore.
So just real quick, in the TV clip that we saw, his lawyer says that this is only happening because you want custody, but you're saying what triggered this was him wanting custody.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. He would try to file that parenting plan over. So what he said was me wanting custody. And I'm like, no, I want what my rights are here in Tennessee, because it's the law in Tennessee, or there are laws here that say if there is a child as a product of second-degree rape, that the perpetrator cannot have custody over that, because they should not have power over their victim, but they can have visitation if allowed. And that's what we were trying to present. It's like, hey, after all these years and growing up and becoming an adult and realizing what my rights are, this shouldn't be happening anymore. And they're like, well, we're not going to recognize you as a victim because he was never convicted.
So is there a statute of limitations? Like, why is this why is this guy not a child rapist? That's what I'm having trouble understanding.
Statute of limitations.
There is, or there wasn't?
There's not. So
what's the issue?
Well, in 2020, I consulted with other attorneys, and they also told me, they said, hey, you can't be recognized as a victim because he was never convicted. And because you guys got married, you can't press charges. And I'm like, okay. And then I had some people stand behind me and say, no, Ash, I think you're wrong. I think they're wrong. I'm going to hook you up with some people. You need to talk with this detective. They are not correct. And I was like, well, if I've been told all these years that I can't press charges, and I can, that is something that I'm going to seriously consider, not because of custody, but because it is my right to be respected as a victim.
Yeah.
And if I don't have to live under the control of this person further, I don't want to. And that took a lot. It took a lot also because part of pressing charges was my relationship with my mother would be gone forever. That was a very, very hard decision. So when I found out I could press charges, I thought about it, and I was like, well, I want to be respected as a victim, and the courts are not allowing it, and it just hurt even more when we were in our custody hearing about education rights. I mentioned that Jason had gotten me pregnant at 15 and that I was a victim of statutory rape. And he said that he thought I was 18.
Who said that? Jason did?
Yes.
In court?
In court. And it just stuck.
That's contempt of court right there.
It just stuck the knife in me further. Like, after all of these years, you're not only trying to take my child from me that I have totally been 50-50 with, been a mother and been the best that I could, but you're also lying and saying that you thought I was 18, that you're not guilty. That's what he said. He said, I'm not guilty. And I'm like, if you're not guilty, you're not sorry. And that is dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's why Patty said she'd be afraid to leave her daughter alone with him. Do you ever think about that?
I have thought about that, but his wife, I have never had a problem with her. She's a very sweet person. I think that that's the story that he told her, that he thought I was 18.
Wow.
All of these things. So I think that she had a lot of, understanding or something back then. But because she was there all of the time and mainly taking the forefront of taking care of the kids, when my kid was with them, that I felt more comfortable because she was the same age he was, and she was always there. But that, I feel, is my mistake over the years. I wish that I had not been so okay with it, but pressure from family, pressure from saying anything, not having any money to fight it, was all other factors and considerations. So I think I tried to convince myself that, I'd be watchful, but I felt better about it because she was there. Now, if she wasn't there, it would be a totally different scenario.
Right. Mm-hmm. So one thing is occurring to me right now, and I want to get to just where things are and how people can help. But what's occurring to me right now is this issue of, if you marry your rapist, he doesn't go to jail. I don't know if that's the law in Tennessee also, but knowing that that's the law in Alabama,
No, it's not.
it's not the law in Tennessee, but it is the law in Alabama.
It's
So it's not the law in Alabama anymore either.
it wasn't the law back then. Like he is.
So it's not the law at all.
No,
They've just told you that was the law.
they told me that forever ago, not recently. I was under the age of consent, you know. So regardless if we got married after the fact, doesn't matter.
So it never mattered.
It never mattered. He should be guilty of the crime.
Right. So how can they find him guilty of, enough to basically give him probation or parole or whatever, but not enough to do jail time? That's confusing. If he's guilty, he's guilty.
Yes, I mean that's and I will never be respected as a victim of statutory rape by the court or the legal system because he's not convicted and guilty of that.
Gotcha. Okay. And where is it right now? Where do things stand right now?
I've been told it's over.
It's over. Okay. So he is essentially not going to do jail time. He's on probation, and you are now sharing custody with him. Still no child support?
No.
Still no child support.
No child support. And he also right now holds educational rights.
So he decides on our education.
Mm-hmm.
And does she live in Hendersonville or Nashville? Where does she go to school?
She goes to school in Hendersonville.
In Hendersonville. So she spends most of her time with him?
No, she spends 1 week on, 1 week off is our
okay.
Court-ordered schedule.
Well, I think the not going to be listed as a sexual abuser. No, that we've established that he's not going to be on any list. I think, the first of all, I just want to say you sharing your story is really valiant and brave and helpful to so many people I don't even think you'll ever even realize, and so very commendable for you to be willing to talk about it this way. And I really appreciate it. And I know everybody watching does too. What would you most like to see come out of the awareness that you are creating right now? And, if people are going to be helpful, how can they help you?
I think creating awareness. I'm not exactly sure, what help can be. I'm always looking for, I have representation, but I'm always looking for, people who are very, very passionate about my situation because it's always been, kind of an uphill battle. It's very expensive. I probably spent over 20 grand just trying to say, hey, unregistered sex offenders shouldn't have educational rights in our school system. But apparently that's not taken as seriously.
Right.
I think that it is just creating awareness and, encouraging and helping other people who might be going through something similar, who had, might be in something similar for their family or community to say something, regardless if the parents are okay with it or not. Something needs to be said because it will give the victims a bit more ground to do something early on in their life, to take a stand, to claim their rights, to make sure they get a handle on their children early on, regardless of the age. So just creating awareness, especially about this story so that it can help other people.
I mean, I think the thing that I get angry about when I think about this story most is just anger with your parents. I mean, they really let you down here in so many different ways, initially, and then in the follow-up, and pushing you to marry him, and not helping you figure out what your legal rights were, and just so many different ways. So I can't imagine the resentment that you must harbor. And, hopefully, I know I can already see that you're going to protect your own daughter from anything like that. But, hopefully seeing this lets people know that there are situations like this out there. And, when they happen, they need to support the daughter in this scenario. I mean, that's the main thing, is that it seems like everybody rallied around him. And whether, what kind of culture protects a rapist more than the victim. And I think we see that even in our laws here, like not the fictitious laws that you were told about, but we have lawmakers here pushing for, so many different protections for rapists, frankly. And there's even a child sex abuser legislator who apologized on tape to one of three women who say he abused them when he was their coach in high school. His name is Representative David Byrd. So your story is not uncommon. And I thank you for your bravery, and I hope that your parents understand how badly they failed you.
Yeah, I have definitely had a lot of reconciliation with my father. He was in the military, so he was gone a lot. So the main person that it was my mother, and I still don't understand. Still to this day, she's adopted Jason and his family as her family. My
Your mother has?
Oh yeah. So the past trial, she flew in just to stay at his home in case she needed to speak at his trial for him. His wife was her maid of honor in her wedding a year ago.
Wow.
My mother, throughout the years, has gone and stayed with Jason while visiting my daughter versus me. Sent Christmas gifts to his house instead of mine.
Wow.
I wouldn't be surprised if she was trying to pay for his attorney fees too. Like, I don't understand, but
Yeah,
there's
that's
a
crazy.
lot of people out there. I understand too that my mom has been diagnosed with some pretty severe mental health disorders, so I have a lot of understanding and peace about, not understanding why, but also having the ability to move on and to not hold resentment, because that letting that resentment go does no longer lets it have power over me.
Right. That's true. That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of power in letting it go. Appreciate you doing this.
Yeah.
I know that you're a actress and musician. Can people hear your music somewhere? Like, can we share that link for you, direct people to that site for you so people can hear your stuff?
Oh man, it's been years since I put out anything. It
Oh,
was
you haven't put out anything. Okay. I wanna, if you
I
do, let us know. We'll help share it.
Yeah, I do have an IMDb page though for my acting things, and
Okay.
some of the films and TV shows that I've been in for that. And it's just Ashley Pereira, and you can find me on there. I love Nashville. I love being here, and I love Tennessee. And I hope that all of you out there can help other people like me. And it's good to be knowledgeable and informed of what's going on, so that people will be more apt to get into politics and to look at the people that they're voting for, and look at defending these rights for these people. So but I think my Twitter handle is TheAsheira, the Ashera.
Okay.
First half of my first name, last half of my last name. And that's
All right. Well, we're gonna pull a clip from this, and I'll make sure to tag your Twitter handle in that and get it from you. But Ashley, I really appreciate you coming on here doing it. Stay in touch with us. Let us know if we can be useful or helpful in any way. And on behalf of everybody that hollers with us, who just sharing your story is going to help people in ways you'll never even really know. So thank you for doing it,
yeah.
and really appreciate you being here with us.
All right. Thank you.
Stay in touch.
Yeah.
So that was Ashley's story. I know a lot of you guys saw that story when we shared it. It went kind of viral, and it personally just sort of struck a chord because it just seemed so twisted. And I just think awareness is really important. His name's Jason Greathouse. He lives in Hendersonville. You guys probably are there, some of you, and it's just important to know who lives amongst us. But really brave of her to tell that story, and just important to share stories when these things happen. So thanks for joining us today, and keep following, and we'll see you next time.